All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Tales. Thanks for joining us today. We have a really, really special guest. Ian, would you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name is Ian Sinnott. I was at Pomona and graduated in 2012, so class of 2012. And after Pomona, I did a number of things. I went traveling, sort of started my own business, building WordPress applications. That was where my software career started after college. And then I worked at some startups. I tried doing my own startups. And now I work at Anthropic, which is an AI lab building AI.
Awesome. There's a lot to unpack there, and I'm sure we'll get to as much as you can in 20-ish minutes. But the first thing I wanted to ask you, take you back to your time at Pomona. What was your favorite Pomona Pitzer or CMS athletic team that maybe you watched or were affiliated with?
Hmm. I really enjoyed the basketball games. I went out for the team my freshman year, and I was actually on the team for a hot minute, super briefly, but I really enjoyed going to the games afterwards. That was my primary interaction with sports was the basketball games, especially the CMS Pomona, right? I guess it was
Yeah.
like intercollegiate, but I always just thought of it as CMS versus us. Those were super fun.
Yeah, they call it the Sixth Street rivalry, and it's still really, really crazy. And that's one of the few games where it's really packed and everyone is there. So
Yeah,
yeah, love to hear
good
that.
times.
But yeah, so during your time at Pomona, you studied economics,
Yeah.
and I'm first taking you sort of back to it. What got you into the world of entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I think it was more a moment in history, not even a moment, just the time in history. So 2012, I graduated, right? And so I was in Pomona 2008, 2012. And during that period, it started out sort of as the financial crisis. And so I didn't have a big sense of this because I was in school. I didn't have to worry about my investments or anything. I was just going to class. And then at the end of that 4-year period, everything was on the rise again, and it was the start of roughly a decade of just immense growth in the technology industry. But also before that, you already had Amazon, you had Google, you had Facebook, you had these massive companies that weren't nearly as massive as they are today, but they existed. I think the moment in time I was at was, yeah, I feel like it's almost inevitable that this would be a thing people think about. It's like, well, what about the technology industry? What about software? Just because of where we were in history, even not knowing that it would continue this decade of tremendous growth. So yeah, I didn't have a plan. I didn't go into econ thinking I know what I'm going to do with my life. Not at all. I had no idea, and I still didn't after I graduated. It worked out well. I think ultimately the thing to take away from it, if anything, is like look at the world as you're in college and ask yourself what is going on in the world and what is important at this moment in history, because it was not always the same. If I'd gone to Pomona 10 years before, it would have been different. If I had graduated in 2022, it would have been different as well. That moment in time was very, I guess all moments in time are unique in their own way, but for me, that was like zero interest rate era, all the valuations are going crazy, everyone's getting funded. That was sort of the state of affairs after I graduated.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so I guess timing is always going to be an important factor in the bigger ecosystem things. But were you part of any clubs or any organizations or your own initiatives during your time at Pomona that sort of that balance your econ major with sort of the technical skills that are needed to operate in the startup world?
For me, the technical skills all came afterwards. So I did two CS courses. I forget the numbers. It was like 51 and 52, I think. 51, I remember we built a game in Java that was Frogger, I think, frog crossing a street. I it didn't stick. Then 52, or whatever the number was, or if it's changed, 52 taught me recursion, which was interesting. CS or programming also didn't stick, but I learned recursion, which was really useful after the fact because it's something people struggle with when they're first learning programming. So that was like what I got out of the CS program, these two courses. But I learned recursion, which made it way easier. Way later, when about around 2013, when I actually got into programming, I was like, oh, I understand this. We did this back at Pomona, and now it all makes sense why it's important.
Yeah. Tell me about that, because I feel like now it's really easy to sort of, whether it's a YouTube search or asking Claude, like, to teach you something, teach you a skill, but back
Yeah.
then, it wasn't always the same, right? So how did you find, like, the motivation or maybe, like, the feeling to pursue these skills?
Yeah, in college, I honestly don't remember what it was. It's been so long. 'Cause I just had from memory, I just had this sense that CS was interesting. Computer science, interesting. Software, interesting. And I don't remember any sort of motivation beyond that. Just thinking, this feels like it's important in a way that many other subjects didn't feel. And maybe it was this inkling that it's super applicable. It's like the practitioner's dream is software. If you like software, you can write software, and then it can go do stuff out in the world. It's super quick, much more so than say hardware. And we have to develop it. The software, you just deploy it and it works or it doesn't. You have this really fast feedback loop where you can create things. And so I don't know if I knew it at that point, but that's what ultimately drew me in is this feedback loop, which isn't the same across all academic fields. For instance, in economics, my thinking was sort of like, well, if I work at the Fed, this will be useful. I can put it into practice. But if you don't work at the Fed, what am I going to do with these economic models? I don't know. But in C, it's very different. Anything you learn, you can go put into practice immediately.
Yeah, good intuition, though. That's probably a good thing to think about back then, yeah.
Yeah,
And
but
then
unfortunately, it didn't stick yet.
yeah, I'll be honest, I took 3 CS courses, 51, 54, and 62, but then after that, I switched to math.
Math is also great. If I could go back and do it again, that's one of the things I would consider is doing math. In part
Yeah,
because I think some things really benefit from having a lot of time to throw at it and really wrap your head around something. I think the field of math is sort of in that category. And it is rare in life to have so much time as you have in college to just throw at something. You just try to learn something, and you don't even need it to be economically applicable to your life. You're not trying to build your career, you're just trying to learn. That's super rare. And so math is one of those things that if you can learn it in college, great. It can benefit you for the rest of your life.
yeah, yeah, and sort of adding on to that, it almost provides, like, a general foundation of, like, knowing how to think, kinda maybe a related field might be, like, philosophy too. I think it's super beneficial, yeah, yeah. And then so to past your time at Pomona, you joined a bunch of these startups. You were a founder at some, and you were founding engineers. One thing I'm personally curious about is what is like the actual difference between being a founding engineer and being like one of the first couple of the engineering team?
Yeah, I would say at a small enough company, the difference is zero. There's no difference because at a small company, you may be in the technical lane, like maybe as the software engineer, you're not going out and you're not fundraising. Anything technical is essentially your responsibility. You work as much as the founders too. So like when I joined a company that had 5 people, and so that meant we were all on founder schedules. We're all working as hard as everyone else. There's no difference. There's a difference in scope between the founders and the employees, but that's pretty much it. So so between those two engineering roles, no difference. Or if you're an employee at an early stage company, you're all in the same boat.
For something like safety reasons or privacy concerns, or maybe it's just maybe the lack of what exists to make that tool. I'm curious, like, what are some of the biggest like challenges you had to overcome to make a product?
I think there's a difference when you are the founder. There are a lot of challenges that I don't think existed when I was an employee at the early stage companies. For instance, product direction or product decisions in general. You can have a lot of input, but ultimately, if a decision has to be made, it's easier to defer to the founder's vision. So if you disagree with the founder, the way something should go, you can disagree, and then you can still just commit to their vision, or you could leave the company, if you really disagree. But if it's something where you feel strongly, but also you know that you might be wrong, then you can just disagree and commit. But what is difficult, or what I found much more difficult, is when two founders disagree. Then there's no clear like, well, whose vision should we commit to if we're going to disagree and commit. And so that was a difficulty. As an employee, I think it's simpler. You know that you're joining into someone else's company, and so you're ultimately signing on to help build their vision. And maybe it's your vision too. Maybe it aligns, but ultimately you're signing on. Whereas if you're the founder, maybe it's your vision. So two founders working together is a possible failure mode. There are also sorts of small decisions that go into product, go into how concretely are we going to build this product? What is the user experience going to be? What are the stories that we're going to tell about our ideal users? Or if you have users, like what are they doing, and how should we prioritize supporting some use cases or fixing issues that we see? that kind of thing. So at the high level, as in like, should we build, what industry should we be operating in? Say, what market do we want to tackle? As an employee, I didn't have any disagreement on that with the founders. But in the minutia of actually getting a product out of someone's head and onto a screen where users can use it, there are all sorts of differences of opinion. And ideally you just go back and forth. I would say a good founder knows that your goal is to hire really good people when you're hiring. Ideally, you want to hire people that are better than you at something. You want to be surrounded by people who are really good at whatever they're working on. So I think one potential mark of a good founder is they don't see themselves as necessarily the best at any one thing. Maybe if it's a product decision, they hire a product person and then they trust them. That's really beneficial because there's just too much to do. You can't do it all yourself
Yeah,
as the founder.
absolutely. For sure. For the students here at the Claremont colleges who maybe are interested in the world of startups, but actually haven't worked in one, what was like one moment where you were part of these different startups, across your time at these different startups where you really felt like maybe this is really hard or wow, this is really fun? Like, what was a moment you knew you were in the world of startups?
I don't know how to answer because I went from college to well, like maybe sort of just kind of puttering around, doing some travel, doing some learnings, to startups. So I hadn't worked at what I think is probably a traditional job for most people. So I don't have a good point of reference. But what what I found interesting was just the degree to which you have agency within a startup. Like, I guess a minor story. This isn't an impactful story. It's just like something that happened at the cybersecurity startup I worked at. Is I would go with the founders to meet some customers, and like we'd just go get a beer with the customer and like talk about their experience using the product. Which is so the scene is you're with the founder, CEO of the company, and one of your top customers, and you at this table. And that's not something you would get if you go to a bigger company, as you can imagine. Like you can go and work your way up to be an executive at a company, but if you are a product engineer working at a small startup, you get as much access as you want, basically, to the customers and to the founders. So I'd say that's a strong point in favor of the startups. There are
Yeah.
reasons not to do a startup, but access to the founders and to the customers and just complete agency, that's part of the draw. It was for me at the time.
Yeah, yeah. I think this is a sub branch of what you mentioned under agency, but one of the things that I also really like is that you can work on the things that you sort of want to. That's under the umbrella of what's needed for a startup. And how do you go about choosing what is like the most important to do? How do you decide what to do first?
Think it depends on what sort of problem you're facing. If the problem you're facing is what to build, this is a common startup problem, or do people like it? Then the thing that I would optimize for is getting new information and getting feedback maybe from your users. Or if you don't have any users, getting users. You need some form of getting to ground truth to help you navigate what to build. Or if you have some ideas about what to build, how do you prioritize? And so you need users, customers. Failing that, like the business is just going to fail completely. So you have to go get users and customers and then lean on their actions. You can lean on their words, what they actually tell you about the product to some degree, but ideally get a sense of what they're actually doing with your product. And people trying it and not using it, if retention looks just terrible, that is also feedback that you need to address. So how to decide what to work on at the early stages, I think is all about figuring out what's working.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And then we'll transition now into sort of your time at Anthropic. And I think a really good maybe starting point is how did you get involved? Like, how did you go from these early stage startups to working at Anthropic?
Yeah. Well, so for anyone who's been writing software in the past 3 years, maybe that includes a number of current students, we've seen the world just shift completely. I would say this is probably near universal, this realization that things are changing. And so for me, that was you go from writing code by hand to having the LLM, having an AI help you write code to, I would say, sometime around November, having the LLM write most of your code. You're doing very little typing at all. So in my mind, this happened around the time of Opus 4.5. To me, that was a threshold. It'll depend on the type of software you're writing, how much it affects one's individual job. So that's the backdrop. It's around the time of GPT-4, well, long ago now. I realized that there's actually something here. GPT 3.5 was like, oh, this is interesting. It's so cool. You can talk to like just an interface on a web page. It'll respond to you. But it just was wrong about everything or about most things while being grammatically correct. But then GPT-4 happens, and to me that was a watershed moment because my rough intuition here is that around 50% of the time it was accurate in the way it would answer your questions, and that was just wild to me. That like there's no human on the other end of this, but you can ask it anything. So that applies to software too. Like you ask it, you say, I want a piece of software that does something, and then it just spits out that software. So the reason that I am now at Anthropic and that I got interested in the AI labs was because I saw my workflow changing. If you've been working in an industry for a decade, you probably have a workflow and it probably doesn't change much. So if it starts changing, if you're being pulled in some direction, that's a huge signal that the world is changing. Something monumental is shifting. And so that was why I got really interested in this working at Anthropic, because I was using Cloud Code, using it a lot, and it completely transformed my workflow. It does not happen every day. It does not happen every decade, transforming your workflow. So
Yeah.
that was the signal.
Yeah, that's great. And you said something about the current students. You're right. I think some of us were probably behind on the schedule that you guys were, but we've definitely the last few months started to use Claude Code, all these different tools. And I think creating just even simple projects or fun projects that we always wanted to do is so much easier. So there's obviously like the aspect of your work and what you do on a daily day basis. But what are sort of like the psychological or like the mindset shifts that also went into play? So pre LLM, how did you approach problem solving with engineering, and then post LLM, were there differences in like how you thought about problems?
It's a good question. Say pre-LM, there's a lot of thought that goes into the how, the execution, if you will, of how to build the software, because you have to do it or you have to hire someone to do it. So that takes up a lot of mind share. Like I would say before LMs, at least LMs in their current state, which are pretty good at building things, at least building MVPs. Before that, you think a lot about how are we going to build the thing, or how are we going to build some version of the thing that is minimal enough that we can build it reasonably quickly and then go start getting feedback. But now the minimal version of the thing can be built very quickly. Regardless of what your minimal version is, you can build it quickly because Claude can just go do it for you. I would say the gravity has shifted a ton from the how, the writing of software, to the questions that come first, like what are we going to write, or the questions that come afterwards, like how do we validate that this is actually something that's useful. I think that's been the biggest shift. Is we've compressed the importance of writing software at least at the early stage, because early stage software, if you have no users, you're essentially in a low stakes situation. So you can lean on the model a ton. If the model produces code that doesn't work perfectly, it's okay. You don't have millions of users counting on you. So early stage is just the perfect time to use an LLM to help you get something out the door and start getting feedback.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. I love that. And if you think about sort of the continuation of this and asking about your vision and Anthropic's vision, what do you think AI will change in like 5 years from now for engineers, but also maybe for like the regular person too?
Yeah, it's a good question. I will say the shortest version of the answer is I don't know. 5 years is an eternity in in the current compressed timeline we're on. If you just think about what the state of technology was 5 years ago versus where it is now, I for one would not have predicted where we are now 5 years ago. That is it's not to say it was totally unpredictable. I do not where I do not know where we will be 5 years from now, but some observations. I'll say the job of software engineering is still valuable in that the agents, the models are very good at writing code, but they're not yet good at the full life cycle of what it means to be a software engineer. Being a software engineer means, for one, taking responsibility, which the models can't do. Maybe we'll never actually be able to do. But someone has to take responsibility for, is the software doing what it was meant to do? And if not, how are we going to go address that? So on that front, I don't see software engineering changing essentially at all. Someone has to be responsible. But then the day-to-day work of actually writing code obviously has changed a ton, and it will continue to change. Where's it going? Maybe it's going towards we author even less of the code ourselves. Like maybe that goes to zero. Essentially, the model's writing all of your code. But that does not mean the model is going to be good at validation and QA. It does not mean the model is going to be good at communication across teams that need to work together. It certainly doesn't mean it's going to be good at like taking a product to market, et cetera. The weird thing about LLMs is that they can pretend to do all this, and maybe they will do it. Like you're like, okay, I need a go-to-market plan for my product. You'll get one. You'll get a bunch of text that is like titled go-to-market plan. But whether or not it works in reality is going to be totally different. What I think is happening to software engineering right now is that individual engineers are getting a tremendous productivity boost in terms of code output, but that also raises other issues, such as like PR review, or for someone in college who's not worked in the industry before, means you create some code and you want to put that code inside the broader code base, the software you're writing, and you generally want that get reviewed by other people on the team. So if I made a mistake, maybe someone else can come in and see that I made a mistake. What we're doing a lot is the agent will write the code. We do the review and we determine, like an individual software engineer determines, yes, it's ready to move it in the code base. But if you have a tremendous amount of code being ready to be moved into the code base, then you have a different problem. It's like maybe you had one magazine to read every day, and now you have 30 books to read every day. You just can't read that many books. So you have a new problem to solve. And that's sort of where we are now, is the new problems created by all sorts of code are what we're trying to solve, what we software engineers are trying to solve.
Yeah. And this is sort of more general, but I feel like one thing that is really interesting about tech and startups is that solving one problem oftentimes like leads to like five more. And it's just continuous, which is really cool.
Yes, yes. It is a thing of beauty. There's always more interesting problems.
And you guys particularly are moving incredibly quick. First of all, congrats on Opus 4.7. Chirp chirp.
You're right, dude. Good timing.
Yeah, good timing, good timing. So one thing I wanted to ask was, how do you balance this growth and like this need to do so many different things really quickly with safety concerns, privacy concerns?
Yeah. The one word answer is oversight, but to dig into that a little bit, you generally have different concerns across teams. And so if your heads down building a new product, you go and you make it work for yourself, maybe, then you make it work for your team. But there's a gate, like a figurative gate between going and getting it out for the broader world, like shipping to the public. If you want to ship to the public, you need some form of oversight. And that's because even if it wasn't code that is in large part written by large language models, even if it's written entirely by humans, it's still totally possible that the team doing the development hasn't thought about all the concerns. Like you said, maybe security or privacy or legal, whatever the concerns are. It's not always going to be on one person to come up with all the answers, unless you're at a startup. To bring it back to the original point, then you have to come up with all the answers. But at a larger company, you don't. You have other teams you can lean on. You have other teams that can help. So that's what we do here. We have different teams that are responsible for different aspects of shipping a product publicly, and it is far more than just the code, as you can imagine. The code is just like one artifact, one piece of it. But yeah, there's a lot that goes into making sure something passes various thresholds of safety as determined by one of the teams.
Great, that's great. Yeah, keeping us safe. And we're almost out of time, but the last question I wanted to ask you is about you. If you think about where you might be in the future, do you see yourself making your own startup? What's sort of next for you? I know you're probably enjoying your time at Anthropic, but yeah,
Yeah, exactly. Very much enjoying my time here. This Anthropic is great. It has exceeded expectations. So when I set out to do a job search, I wanted to work here, and then I started working here, and everything is even better than I thought. But yeah, things are great over here. Things are very busy, but at various stages in our lives, I think we want to be busy. I think college students should get busy after college. For myself, at this stage in my life, I also want to be at some level of intensity that is, not zero. I want to be working hard. There's an energy to it, which is part of what drew me. Is everyone's work on this? Everyone is excited about the mission. So yeah, future plans. I've thought, but when I went into the job search, I thought about startups, right? Because you can go join a company, you can go start a company. There's always this option. And my take at the time was roughly, well, if I build a company, it'll have something to do with AI because I'm completely obsessed. My whole mind is like focused on the world changing in this way. And so if I'm going to go build something with AI, what is my angle? What is my advantage? What is my special take that is going to help me get to success? And I didn't have a good answer to that. So maybe it is a better idea to just go work at one of the labs because then I'll get an inside view of how things actually work inside one of these companies, and I'll just get to work on these products that I myself use and find extremely valuable.
and maybe one day it'll give you that insight that is unique to you, and maybe you'll make your own.
Yeah, potentially. Who knows? There's something to think about if you're going to go do a startup is why you, why now, why this market, why you and your founders, if you have other ones. Ideally, you have good answers to all these. So I
Yeah,
suppose Pomona people should apply to YC, not because it's YC, just because that they will ask you questions in the application that you'll have to answer. So like, as just, if you're not sure what questions to answer about yourself and your startup, go apply to YC. The application will ask you a bunch of questions, and that'll force you to think about stuff. And then if you get an interview, even better, they'll ask you questions in person. So always be trying to figure out why.
That's actually, yeah, I like that. Okay. Well, Ian, thank you so much for your time. This was a pleasure.
Yeah. Thank you too. It's I'm glad you reached out. It's very nice to be able to interact with Pomona in more ways. I've been myself trying to do more outreach for any students that don't know. I didn't know this when I was a student. There's a, what is it called? Sage and Connect, I think.
Thanks for connecting.
There's a portal for people to connect, especially to connect alumni with students. And so if you didn't know, go check it out. It's I mean, I don't have any good review of the portal itself, as the piece of software is not great, but there are people in there. It is a method of connecting with other people. So current students could check that out. Also, I'm on there, so you can come find me on there if you want a one-on-one conversation.